think we're going to go ahead and get started. It looks like it's about 6:01. So for those of you that were able to make it this evening, welcome for our first of two listening sessions related to our school referendum that is on the ballot for the November 3rd election that's coming up, and it's hard to believe just a few short weeks away here as we're about to hit the month of October at the end of this week. Again, I'd like to thank you for those of you that were able to make it. I'm Ryan Christensen, Superintendent of Schools for the Marshfield School District. In addition to myself, we have Pat Sauson, our Director of Business Services that's here this evening. The two of us will start the program off today with a short presentation on some of the details and background on the referendum, and then we will from there shift to taking public comment on the listening session portion of the program that we have here this evening. And along with that, for the start of the program, maybe you could advance the first slide. Jenny, we do have some slides that Pat and I will be speaking to. This first slide is just giving an overview on details that we'll be covering as part of the presentation portion of the session this evening. And we'll go ahead to the next slide, Jenny. So to begin with, as far as the issue or the reason we're here, what's at stake? I think the statement on the slide here pretty much summarizes the reasoning behind the importance of the referendum and what is at stake here, and the fact that this is all about preserving the high-quality education our community has come to expect. The Marshfield School District has maintained a long history of excellence in education, and the district has been able to do that while at the same time operating as a low-spending district. As we'll get into a little bit later in the presentation with some of the details that Pat is going to cover, you'll find that even with the referendum dollars that we have, the school district continues and would continue to operate as a comparatively low-spending district. But again, what this really ultimately comes down to is about maintaining existing programs and continuing the same type of caliber of opportunities that we've been able to provide for our students in the school district. A few of the facts related to where we stand right now, and getting into what the proposal is for the referendum with the vote in November. The district right now is on the fourth year of a 4-year non-recurring referendum, at $3 million per year. So it's important to begin by pointing out that the current school year that we are in is covered by the tail end of the last referendum that was passed and successfully approved by the community a few years ago. The vote that happens on November really does not impact the current budget year. It does not affect or change the tax bills that will be coming out in the month of December. The $3 million from the 4-year non-recurring referendum is still in place for the existing school year that we're in right now. The vote that we have coming up in November is to begin next school year. And that referendum does involve a small increase up to an annual amount of $3.5 million. Again, the current referendum stands at $3 million per year. The proposal is $3.5 million. That increase from $3 to $3.5 million is related to increasing costs for a variety of different reasons that we'll get into moving forward with the presentation. But it's important to note that this really is about maintaining. It's really the dollars, even with that small increase, would allow the district to continue to stay at the current program levels and maintain existing programs for our students. Then we move to the next slide, Jenny. The slide here, as far as referendum history here in the school district of Marshfield, does a good job of outlining the history of operational referenda that the district has been operating for quite some time. In fact, if you come up with numbers here, we've entered into our 19th year of operational referenda to provide programming for our students, dating back all the way to fiscal year 2003. You can see that over time, and the colors denote 5 different referenda. The school district right now stands in this last bar here at the end of the chart as you see it here. We're in the final year of what has been 5 consecutive successful referenda that have been passed by the school district. The red color off on the end, the initial referendum was a 3-year referendum for $1 million per year. Thereafter, the school district voters successfully passed another referendum for $1 million per year. It was in the beginning of fiscal year 2009 that we see that there was an increase. There was a 5-year non-recurring referendum that did increase the first 3 years and then plateaued off at the $3 million mark. From that period of time on, as you can see here by doing a count, which is about 11 years, we've been in that 3 to 2.5, and the current proposal is $3.5 million range. So this graph right here does a very good job of, again, reminding the community and outlining the fact that we've been operating with referenda dollars for quite some time within the school district. And during that entire stretch, this really has been about maintaining programs and opportunities for our students. The current proposal is to stay at that existing program level with if passed, at the $3.5 million per year mark, the same level of programming that the district currently operates. So the next slide, Jenny, if we could. Just a little bit of additional background relating to why the override is needed. It may seem hard to believe that many of the school funding challenges that public schools in the state of Wisconsin currently face dates back all the way to 1993. But that's the facts, that's the truth of the matter. In 1993, state revenue caps were established, and the way in which those caps work has been in place ever since that year. What's pertinent and very important to the school district of Marshfield and a certain number of relatively small number of school districts throughout the state is that at the time that these caps were put in place, Marshfield was operating as a low spending district. Marshfield and the others in the state that had, at that time, not knowing these caps were going in place and being kept, passed a levy that was relatively comparatively speaking, put the district as a low spending district. And we've really been limited by those caps ever since, and how much do we levy from one year to the next. Beyond that, the only way in which the district is able to secure additional operational funds is to go to and pass a referendum with voters within the community. Just a few other details to cover and run through that really has exasperated that situation for low spending districts like the school district of Marshfield is the fact that there are a number of other decreases that have come along the way of state and federal funding. There are additional mandates that add costs, and obviously, like everything, whether you're talking about utilities, supplies, costs related to staffing, costs go up and have gone up nearly every year over the course of that period of time. So the school district here in Marshfield by no means is alone in this situation. The conditions that I'm describing points to the fact that there are many referenda that are going on around the state and have for a number of years now. In fact, as you'll see in the red font at the bottom of the slide here, in just the last 2 years, 200 referenda have gone to voters to exceed revenue limits. Again, just in that 3-year period. In fact, as we're heading into the November 3rd election, here in a few weeks, there are 45 school districts that are going to a referendum vote on the November 3rd election. The school district of Marshfield is one of 45 school districts around the state of Wisconsin that will have a vote on that ballot in November 3rd. So that's a quick rundown of background information, I guess I should say, to kick things off. From there, Pat, I will turn things over to you.
Thank you, Ryan. We do have an advance slide, Jenny, please. So Ryan just kind of laid the foundation for you in terms of why we consider ourselves to be a low-spending district. And this is actually the part where I have done a number of times over my many years in the school district, talked about the low spending and basically providing some statistical data that backs up that claim. What you see here is a graph which shows tax revenue per student, basically, and this is all derived from information that comes directly from the Wisconsin Department of public instruction, so you can go to the website and find this information. What the graph shows are roughly 20 school districts that are in a similar size enrollment as Marshfield is, which is around 4,000 students. So you see school systems in here such as Menominee Falls, Capana, Germantown, and here. They all have enrollments roughly in the 4,000 student range. And what the graph shows, if you look at the gray bar there, that's the state average of how much, on average, a school district receives in tax revenue per student. And that I can't see it, the numbers are awfully small there, I apologize for that. But the state average number is $14,398 per student that receives funding on average from the state. If you look at the yellow bar there towards the middle of the section, that is where Marshfield stands right now in terms of their revenue per member. So they receive roughly $2,500 less per student than the state average, or $12,701. The yellow bar you see over to the far right-hand side shows Marshfield where they would stand if they did not have a referendum right now. So these numbers are 2018, which is the most recent data available on DPI's website. But it shows you basically where Marshfield would stand if we didn't have a referendum right now. And basically, the point here obviously is to illustrate that among school systems our size, it's pretty clear that we are on the low end of the spectrum and well below the state average in terms of how much we receive by comparison to a lot of our peers with comparable sized school systems. And even when we receive those additional dollars through referendum, it still puts us basically in the lower end of the half here of the school districts that are close to us in Marshfield in terms of enrollment. So, there's the basic, argument right there that shows that at least by this matrix in terms of revenue per student, we definitely receive less than many school systems our size, and that goes back to Ryan's description of what took place back in 93 in revenue accounts. Next slide, Jim. Another measurement that basically can give you some indication in terms of low spending school systems is the tax rate. Now, this is the common tool that's used to measure how much a taxpayer has to pay in property taxes. So the tax rate, or mill rate, is known as, basically reflects a dollar amount, which is for every $1,000 of assessed value that you have in your home. And so, again, looking at the gray bar in this illustration, you can see it. The state average tax rate is $9.37. So what that means is, on average, if you average $100,000 home, that home would be assessed at $9.37 for each $1,000 of assessed value, or $937 when you simply move the decimal place forward. So statewide average in terms of tax rate stands at $9.37. In Marshfield, our tax rate currently is at $8.41. So again, close to $1 below the state average in terms of tax rate. And what you see at the far right-hand side there, in that smaller yellow shaded bar there, that's the tax rate the school district would be at if we had no referendum. And so, again, the illustration here is that as we see these additional tax dollars in the form of our referendum, we're not going from being an average spending district to a high spending district or even a medium spending district. We're trying to basically preserve what we can with the programs that we have and do it at a very economical cost by comparison to other school districts. And the cohort of school districts that I'm showing here are the neighboring school districts with a 50-mile radius of Marshfield as well as the valley averages. Obviously, it makes more sense to use the region here and talk about this in context of tax rate, because that's truly a comparison that we want to do, knowing how much it costs here to pay your taxes versus another school system or area right down the road. And again, this information comes directly from the Department of Public Instruction website, a nonpartisan public entity. So these are not numbers that are deliberately designed to try to show Marshfield in a favorable light. It's basically objective data that exists on the website that we were able to pull from to give you some sense of where and how Marshfield stacks up in terms of tax rate to their peers in the Valley Conference as well as the neighboring school districts. Next slide, Jim. And then again, the often spoken idea that Marshfield is a high-performing school system. What this shows is a matrix referred to our ACT composite scores. Now, it's the easiest one to pull up here, but if I was to look at other exams, statewide assessments, forward, AP scores, whatever the case might be, you'd see similar results. And I should mention that I have updated these charts and graphs over 20-some years that I've been doing it. And each time the results are very similar to what you're seeing right here. So as you look at the top chart and see that our tax rate is exceptionally low and quite lower than the state average and our peers by and large, you'll note that the bottom section, where we stand in terms of performance, that our ACT scores outperform anybody else in that same cohort group of school districts. So again, as we've talked so many times in the past, low spending, high performing, the most recent data we're able to find on DPI's website continues to support that argument. Next slide. So in terms of what we're talking about with the increase of the $500,000 on top of the current $3 million referendum, the actual impact to the taxpayer would be 21 cents per $1,000 of assessed value. And here I show a couple of different illustrations of how that may impact the taxpayer. $21 for a $100,000 home, or the median home value in Marshfield is $163,597. That taxpayer would pay $34 in additional taxes if the referendum is successful. And I should mention too, in the interest of transparency and full disclosure, because we're building off of a current referendum, should the referendum fail, that would have a significant decrease in the tax rate. In fact, it would drop by about $1.25. And so again, if we're looking at a $10,000 home, if the referendum fails, the tax rate would go down by $125 for that house. So I guess it's just important to clarify that so people understand that the $21, that's an increase, is an increase on top of the current referendum dollars that are already being paid for by the taxpayer. And it's also important to mention, too, that as we look at school district's tax rate and these types of numbers, that it is only one part of your tax bill, too. So you've got the county, you have mid-state tech, you have the university system, you have the city of Marshfield, and all of these have, independent of the Marshfield School District, a setting of their own tax rate. And so even though we talk about this in terms of what would happen to your taxes related to the school district, obviously out of our control is all of the other tax entities. So we might suggest something to go up or down, and then when you get your tax bill, you may notice that other entities may have increased or decreased as well. So really it's a matter of looking at all of the different taxing individuals, taxing groups that are able to have some kind of impact on the overall tax rate that you have to ultimately pay as a taxpayer. Next slide. Okay, so here I wanted to talk a little bit about the budget reductions that we're going to be covering in some detail here shortly, and sort of why and how we use the process that we do. First of all, we propose, before the referendum, what the actual reductions are going to be. We do this for a couple of reasons. One is we believe it's the community's right to have a full, clear understanding in terms of what's at stake for our school system. Obviously, there are a lot of programs that I'll be sharing with you in a moment here that are going to be impacted because we may have to potentially pull these out of the budget if we don't have a successful referendum. And it's just really our duty, I guess, to basically make certain everyone has a full understanding as to just exactly what's at stake here. Also, we believe the district has a right to know what's at stake, too. You're going to find here, as I go through the list, we have roughly 25 or so positions that are potentially at stake here. In other words, individuals that are currently working that could lose their jobs in light of a failed referendum. And it's obviously, I feel a moral duty for them to be aware of what's at stake as well, because it's going to ultimately affect their livelihood and their future. And then lastly, it's important for us just for budget planning purposes to have a good sense of where we stand in our finances so that we can submit a balanced budget to the school board for consideration. So a little bit in terms of the process that's used to determine what exactly it is that gets reduced to the operating budget. It's rather extensive. It began back in February. It began back in February when we had the administration sit down and do a priorities exercise, which basically determined, based on different aspects of our current operations across the entire district spectrum, what they believed were most valued, most important, and then basically least important, or at least I guess areas where we should examine first if we have to make reductions. Those segments of the different categories of operations then were taken back to respective schools, and the leadership teams of the schools also had an opportunity to provide input. They were asked to give us recommendations in terms of any ideas they may have for how we might be able to reduce expenses or increase revenue. And then with that set of ideas, those come back to the administration for yet another exercise where they would go through and categorize and prioritize based on those ideas, and then lump them into the various priority areas previously identified. So after we go through this part of the process with the staff and the administration, we then submit the first draft to our finance committee for consideration. And again, the ultimate goal here is to get to the $3.5 million reductions that we need to make in the event the referendum fails. So from there, then we've had some conversations, some of the feedback group from the finance committee as well as the executive committee of the school board. And now on October 14th, during our next regularly scheduled school board meeting, we will have as an action item on there the reductions list to be considered for removal from the budget. And then my last bullet point here, I just kind of like to include that because I don't want there to be a perception out there that what is on the list isn't important to the school system. Quite the contrary, we believe that everything that we have in our operations right now is critical and extremely important, particularly in the context of what we're able to provide in terms of opportunities for the students of our school system. So even though we basically had to identify this list, it isn't under the auspice that we believe these are not important. It's simply that we are tasked with trying to come up with a way to balance our budget, and therefore we've had to identify some areas, and the process that we use hopefully give it some fidelity and some objectivity, and that is truly the intent of why we take this approach. Next slide, David. So, beginning now with the budget reductions list that is ultimately being put forward to the school board for action during the October 14th school board meeting. Beginning with administration and district level staff, freeze all salaries, and I hope I don't repeat that each time. Basically, there's a salary freeze across the entire district in each different employment category: support staff, custodial, instructional staff. So there is an intent that there would be no increases in salaries for staff next year. Again, back under administrative district level staff, we're looking at the reduction of one full-time administrator as well as a district level position. Support staff, we'd be looking at eliminating a central office position, the clerical position at either the middle or high school, and then reducing the number of elementary regular education assistants that we have in the school district. We currently have 16 in the district, so that would be a reduction of 1/2 or a loss of 8 staff members there. In terms of custodial staff, again, salary freezes, there would be a removal of overtime. Overtime occurs for custodial staff on weekends and evenings, but also a few select staff have half an hour a day that they work extra for issues that arise before and after school. And also there would be elimination of one full-time custodian as well. Or that eventually could be two part-time custodians, but an amount equivalent to $36,400 or so. And by the way, I should mention, we don't necessarily have every individual staff member identified for reduction of who this would be. The dollar amounts that you see here are based on averages for the various positions in that respective classification. Moving on to the instructional staff reductions. Instructional staff, of course, is the largest portion of the operational budget. Our primary product that we serve is the instruction to our students, and of course that is done through the dissemination of our instructional staff that provide that instruction. So here, we unfortunately had to pull the largest amount of money because they reflect the largest portion of the operations. Again, beginning with freezing of all staff salaries in this category, the elimination of the accountant and district coordinator. We only have one district, so that program would have to be absorbed by other staff. A reduction of one full-time social worker, counselor, foreign language, with the lowest enrollments, which would be French. Eliminating the academic resource center position, eliminating the educator effectiveness coordinator. And again, all of these positions, as I mentioned, and many of them mean ultimately that these duties would need to be reassigned to existing staff who already have, quite honestly, full course loads and full workloads anyway. Reduction of the middle school and high school CRC English. And that would result in a savings of roughly $360,000, but what that actually means is that we simply have to redeploy those students in different classrooms, and that would cause it to increase the class size. Extended contracts that occur, sometimes we have summer contracts for nursing assistants, additional work that has to be done in the summer months, counseling services, those types of things would have to be reduced or eliminated. Reduction of the family consumer ed position, reduction or removal of a CTE, career technical education program, so that would be things such as woods, metal shop, what else, computers, this is what I think it was. What was that? Automotive, thank you. And then consolidating advanced placement as well as honors with low loans and one FTE. Right now, those courses are being taught independent of one another, so we have to look at combining those. And then lastly, look at departmental budgets. Each of these would be reduced somewhere in the 10 to 15% range. So technology would be down about $70,000. And again, when you look at something like that, what you're ultimately doing is deferring upgrades of technology over subsequent years. And that, of course, means that you're going to be using aging technology longer. Reduction of the athletics budget, so equipment probably won't be purchased in the same level that has been in the preceding years. Building grounds budget would be reduced by $53,000. So again, we're looking at the potential for deferred maintenance, which we talked about at length in the school system, and the need of why we don't really want to be doing that, obviously, because it does cause higher cost issues down the road. And then a reduction of the curriculum budget of $62,000, we're going to have 10% or so of that overall budget, so resources wouldn't be available at the same level as they currently are. And then under the category of other, increasing the student fees, reduction of employee benefits. This is a big one, eliminating middle school sports. This is one that would then potentially be replaced with some type of a volunteer program. If you had a conversation with Nathan Blaney, our athletic director, or others that are familiar with these programs, in doing this type of a change, you can certainly run an intramural program. What tends to happen is that quality of the programming diminishes considerably. So that's certainly a very concerning one. Cutting high school athletics with low enrollment right now, I believe that would be the golf program potentially. Cutting the clubs and organizations 7 through 12, so groups such as HOSA, and FCCLA, and FBLA, and forensics, and those types of things, student government, would all be on the chopping block basically. No drama or musicals would be held anymore. And then last two items there, reduction of staff travel, as well as reduction of the supply budget of 5%. So in total, then that gets us to that goal of around $3.533 million in reduction. And again, nothing on this list is easy for us to have to endure. And with each one of these reductions, there's no doubt it's going to cause a ripple effect that will put some additional stress and strain on staff, as well as the fact that there will be some things that students once had an opportunity to have access to that will no longer be available, which is why we are obviously quite concerned about the need to try and maintain what we have here in the school system as we had in previous referendum. Right?
So I think with that, if you advance to the next slide, Jenny, at this time, that concludes the short presentation that we had put together. At this time, we will move forward into taking comments in the way of hearing what those of you that are in attendance here this evening would like to share. You can see outline up here on the slide. If you do wish to speak and share some feedback with us, your thoughts, we would ask as an here that you state your name. As is standard, we have a 3-minute time period for making comment at our meetings, and then as you can see as well, we respectfully request that you be respectful, avoid repeating others, and please stay on the topic of the referendum. All right, so if you are interested, we've got the microphone up front here. I'm not sure, Mike, if it's turned on and ready to go. If we have anybody that's interested in going first.
relevant. I just wanted to say that there is a large group of parents and community members that value the Marshfield School District and really want to just express our support for passing the referendum. And we also know that this is a really difficult time because school doesn't look the way it did last year. Our lives are completely disrupted. But there's a large group of people in Marshfield that recognize that this is all temporary, but our school district is here to stay. And that, you know, $40 or even $60, it doesn't matter. It's an investment not only in my children, but in our community. And I remember last time we had some public listening sessions for the referendum. Becky, I'm sure you remember it. And we had parents in the room that were advocating for keeping our gifted and talented coordinator. And that's an incredibly important position. But then one of our teachers that works with children that don't have parents of means stood up and said, I'm here to advocate for passing the referendum. Remember this, Francis? And I'm speaking on behalf of all those children whose parents can't come or don't come to school working. And so I want to just bring that forward tonight, that we're not just looking at the kids that are looking at AP and looking at sports. There's a lot of kids that aren't involved in those, but we're also talking about support services for children that need it most. And you know, the research actually shows that the children that don't go on to post-secondary education are more likely to stay in Marshfield for their entire life. So really that also underscores the need to invest in our schools so that every child gets the very best education that they can. So, as one parent of 2 high school students in Marshfield, I just want to go on the record saying, I absolutely support the referendum. You guys have always been known to be responsible fiscally, and we know that you are this time. And this is beyond your control. It's a state funding flaw. And thank you for being so transparent and for being so well organized. And I'll be voting yes on November 3rd. Thank you.
Does anyone by chance have any questions on any of the material that was presented? Anything that we could maybe provide some additional clarification or details on?
Maybe you could say about the impact on the taxes. Nothing this year, but this is, once this passes, or whatever happens, this is forever.
So,
and I'm kind of wondering why we didn't have options. Would you go for this or this? I don't know, I got a hard time for everything when everything's going on there.
So yeah, I think you're speaking to the recurring versus non-recurring.
Recurring,
Right. And maybe, Jay, could you go back to there's one of the last slides that I presented on that shows the last, I think about 19 years what we've done. Yes. I'm not sure if you were here when we covered this slide. But I think it's good to bring this one back up just to kind of do a quick review of the background and history of where the school district has been. Because what you'll see here is the history of operational referenda that the district, the school district in Marshfield has had, which, you know, we've entered into 19 years of operating on with the operational override because of additional funding beyond revenue caps. So the color coding shows the groupings by actual referenda that were passed. So it begins with the red bars off on the left. We had a 3-year non-recurring at the amounts that were shown. That was followed by another 3-year non-recurring. Those first couple were at the same dollar amount. It was the third 1 year, which involved, again, it was non-recurring. But you can see that it did have increases the first 3 years and then plateaued off after that. And the 2 most recent ones, you know, there was a small reduction for the 4th and then returned back to the $3 million mark, which is what we're in currently. So the last bar at the far right in black is the current year that we're in, the final year of the current 4-year non-recurring reference to, but I think I'll begin by, I think as far as trying to address your question is, as we said before, the reason we're here and so many school districts are where they're at is because of the state revenue caps that were put in place back in 1993, which restricts and limits the amount that districts can levy for funding at a certain amount. And those have been in place ever since that period of time. Well, a lot of costs have increased and have exceeded the limits that have been placed on school districts, which is why so many districts go to operational referendum. One of the other slides that we noted is just in the last 2 years, since 2018, there have been 200 similar referenda in districts around the state. In fact, in November, there are 45 school districts. Marshfield is one of 45 school districts around the state that are going to a referendum vote because of needing additional funds to support schools. As far as burden specific to the situation in Marshfield, as we work with the school board, Francisco Hahn, our board president, is sitting right here as well. That was a decision that the board ultimately ended up making. And I think the graph you see here helps show and tell the reason why. The problem we're dealing with is not going away. Yes, a recurring is indefinite at the amount that is going to be under question. But we've gone 19 years now hoping that the state funding formula would be fixed somehow at the state level for legislation, and that simply is not happening. The issue that we're facing is not going away. It is recurring, which is why the approach this time around was to address this problem once and for all, because as you can see, 5 times, once every 3 to 5 years, we come back and go through this entire process together. And I hope it's okay for me to say, because I know that we do have a few people that worked and put a lot of time into this process over the years, that we also started hearing references made to things like referendum fatigue and the enormous amount of work, effort, and time that goes into this process over and over for a problem that simply is not going away. So I guess the short answer is to try to address something that there's no end in sight, as it would appear at this point in time, to suggest that there's anything different than the need that we have with this. So I don't know if I've got a first.
Yeah, can you go to the next one? Yeah, go to the next slide, please. Next one, sorry. So this is, I think, by the way, your question is a really good question. I'm glad you asked it, because we do need to make certain that everybody has a good understanding of, I think, the rationale here behind this. But what this slide illustrates, I mentioned before, shows that the far right-hand side there, with the yellow shaded box there, which has a dollar amount at the top of 11,946. This is the amount that Marshfield would be receiving right now per student if we did not have a referendum. So if there was no referendum whatsoever, that's how much money we would be getting. State average is $14,398, so several $1,000 more per student is what this, so we're several $1,000s less per student. The amount that your tax dollars and my tax dollars are paying for moves that to the other yellow shaded bar there, $12,701. So, we talked again at length about this notion that we're a low spending district. But what this really illustrates, because these are all school districts very close in size to Marshfield, what this really illustrates is school districts our size are getting funded far more than we are. And most of the school districts on this chart wouldn't even have to go to referendum. They wouldn't even need to. But because we were basically penalized in 1993, we find ourselves in this position where we always have to come back to the taxpayers and say, can we please have enough money simply to run the programs that just about everybody else our size already has the money for. I think that's a very important distinction to make. The next point I wanted to make was that in 18 years now, this is going to be our 6th referendum that we're going to be going to taxpayers for. And of all 6 of those referendums, we have asked basically the same question. And that question is, does Marshfield support sustaining the current programs that we have in our school system? And the answer has been repeatedly, yes, they do. The majority of taxpayers believe that the programs that Marshfield are offering right now should stay in place. So the question simply becomes one of, at what point then do you say, well, since there has been a demonstration that this is supported, it basically means the community seems to value these programs. If they value these programs, why then do we need to keep them back over and part 2. Part 3 is, in fairness to the 25 staff members that each 3 or 4 years are basically trying to figure out if they're going to have a job again. And so as we go through the reductions list here and talk about the 25 positions that are currently I'm talking about, it's very unfair to them to have to put them through this kind of scrutiny every time that we decide to go back to taxpayers. Now, to your point, that it's a valid one. It's certainly one where, how do we know what's going to happen in the future in 5 years and 10 years? Now, if there is some miracle where we have additional funding that comes our way, and it's a windfall and it wasn't expected, the school board retains the authority to be able to say we don't have to tax all of those dollars. They actually could, in fact, tax less. Now, to be quite honest with you, it hasn't happened in our history simply because of the current financial situation that we're in. But that is also a possibility. If we discover that at some point down the road the $3.5 million was not enough, again, full disclosure, the board retains the right to still say we may have to go back again. Now, I don't foresee that happening in the foreseeable future, but I want to make certain everybody understands the various dynamics and elements at play. The $3.5 million price tag that was placed on this current referendum was done so with a lot of reflection, an idea, a thought where we wanted to make certain we had enough in there to cover the operational expenses that we had, but not one that we felt was basically more than we would ever need. So we found a dollar amount that we felt kind of struck that balance of continuing to do what we have said that we would do and promised that we would do in the past 18 years, which is sustain the current operational programs that we have. So that, I think, in a nutshell, are really the arguments as to why it is that we decided this one time to see if the taxpayers are ready to say, yes, we want these programs in our community, we want them to be here indefinitely.
I think there was one other part of the question which was very good, was why not this or that? I think I heard you say, talk about the choice. The problem with that is the way the resolution approval process is, or the way a question has to look on a ballot. You can't do both. You can't have the question on the ballot that is one or the other. You have to take one position and have the question on the ballot be a yes or no. In some respects, it would be nice if the opportunity was there to have it be one versus the other, and have the choices you outlined in your question. Thank you. I don't know, maybe during that period of time, somebody got the motivation to come and make a comment or share some additional feedback. If not a comment or feedback, are there any additional questions that any of you may have related to wanting some additional clarity on the material that was presented? Eric, maybe you're just doodling and not writing questions. I thought maybe you were going to have some good questions to quiz us with, but...
No, I'm just recording on this
Oh.
line.
All right. We kind of give a one last call. All right. Well, I think that we'll call it a close then on the official comment portion of the presentation. With that, we will wrap up and conclude things. If there is something after we're officially closed down and end, I will be around. Pat is here for 2 additional minutes if one of you individually would like to come and maybe pose a question to us.
And I would just add to Ryan that there is additional information on our website which we will continue to update, including the Q&A document that as questions arise, we'll try to make certain that we keep that up to date so that hopefully we're getting all of the questions addressed as we go through the process.
So we also got a community mailing with a newsletter that will be going out soon. And then finally, I think it would be good to go ahead and make note of the fact that we'll be doing the second one of these listening sessions next week, Monday, at same time, 6 o'clock. So back here at the middle school gym, 6 o'clock next Monday. I'm trying to remember, that is October 5th, Monday, back here at 6 o'clock. All right, thank you.